So, but it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out today. And before we get into your life as a relationship expert, I want to know right now when we look at the calendar, 4 years ago, everything came to a halt with the pandemic. How did you survive that time period? And how has it changed the way that you do things now?
So the pandemic was a sudden burst of the ego at work, and it made trouble for everyone. And
Yeah.
so what I started to realize is the story you told was the life you had. So I know a woman who told a story of she was very successful financially as she sold securities, and her specialty was new companies. And so she told a story that she'd have 200 people on her Zoom call, and they would all buy. And that was one of the things she did at the start of the pandemic. And along with that, she told a story that they would all be healthy because her family would be together, and she would use this off time to be together. So she told a story about family togetherness. Then she told a story about prosperity, health, family togetherness, and then she told about living her life in California with her family. And so all those things happened, and everything that the world was complaining about and sorry for, and they all told millions of stories about the pandemic, everybody, and they were screwy and wild and crazy. And so she didn't tell any of that. She didn't tell any of that story, and because she didn't tell it, it didn't happen for her.
Yeah.
So it was really amazing. Like, here's a woman who had a really great life in the pandemic, and
Yeah.
here's all the people telling horrible stories, and they're living horrible stories.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
became a big believer in storytelling.
Yeah, sure. Well, but the reality of it too is that I've noticed a lot of people have said that really this time there was a lot of silver linings. I don't think it takes
Yes.
away from what actually happened, but I think there was a lot of people where time slowed down, they took advantage of things. There was just a natural flowering of their worlds during that time.
Yeah, yeah. So the people who wanted more time got more time for like a surprise reason, and uh, and the people who worried got more worried,
Yeah,
and things got harder for them.
yeah,
And so there were people both, and I really believe the difference in the two people in the pandemic was the storytellers who told great stories, and there's people who told doubt stories, and they got what they doubted, and the storytellers told they got what they wanted. And so the more you committed to it, the better your life was.
yeah,
So that's what appears to me, and like I'm looking at all the self-help authors and all their books and all the things they write, and I'm saying, well, they're all telling you the same message, which is you've got to tell the story you want, and that's all. Forget positive thinking for the moment because that's got a scar on it. But if you just think all the self-help authors are telling one story over and over and over again, and they're trying to express you can tell the story too, right? And so I'm thinking, well, what are they trying to say with all this language? They're all trying to say you've got to be the storyteller
yeah,
all the time because there's two stories in the world. There's what you want and what you doubt, and those are the two stories. That's
yeah,
all there is. And if that's all there is, like, well, then I got to be convinced that this world is actually operating on stories. This world is responding to stories because, like, how does everything get done?
yeah,
Well, because people who tell stories get them done.
yeah,
And they tell the story and they keep on telling it, and then they follow through with action. And so their action is following their story. And so that makes just a ton of sense. And the people who struggle with all kinds of things struggle because they tell two stories. They tell want stories and doubt stories, literally at the same time.
yeah,
And the reason they tell those stories is because they got four storytelling machines. One is what they think, one is what they imagine, one is what they believe, and one is what they say with their mouth. And all four of those carry stories.
yeah,
And because they're not aware of those four things, they don't even realize that, like, an imagination picture could tell a story,
yeah,
or one little sentence could tell a story. Screw this,
right,
right?
right, right.
That's telling a whole story.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I'm thinking that life is not complicated once you finally grasp the idea of a story. And I was doing the exercise, going to Walmart, picking up an item, any item, and saying, somebody told a story about this, and that's why it's here.
Yeah.
Pick up another thing. Somebody tells a story about this, that's why it's here. And I kept on doing it over and over again. I started to really feel, wow, all these things exist because of storytellers.
Mhm.
Can you imagine uh, Elon Musk talking to 2,000 investors and he's telling a story, but he's 80% what he wants and 20% he doubts.
Right.
And if he told an 80-20 story, people would feel it. They would feel it and then they wouldn't do it
Yeah.
because they would feel something's right, not right, something's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. So let's get to the heart and soul of what you do for a living. I know you help a lot of people out. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders at career day, and one
Okay.
kid says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
I start with I'm a marriage coach. That's where I start.
Okay.
And the reason I say I'm a marriage coach is because I'm not a marriage analyst. I'm not a marriage counselor. I'm not a marriage, therapist. I'm not all those words because when you add the words, you add a story. And so, what is a coach? A coach doesn't have a lot of baggage on it because a coach was borrowed from sports. And so when that word was borrowed from sports and taken in by the self-help community, and they started to say coaching, well, coaching became a thing. It became larger, it's still working on getting larger. And so when you say coach, you don't have any baggage to it like a therapist has. So or any other kind of title you'd add to marriage. So I ended up uh, starting to work with couples, and the couples, I started to realize a stunning thing that I didn't know. They can't learn together.
Yeah.
They can't learn together.
Yeah.
Like, so one is listening to one set of ideas, another is sitting to the other, and they're coming to completely different conclusions. So they really can't learn together because they have such dramatic interpretations. And by the way, these marriages are in trouble. That's one of the reasons why this is happening. So they're not in harmony, they're not connected, they're not having a lot of mutual time. They're in different planes. And so why can't they learn? They can't learn because they're operating in these two different worlds. So I started to work with one half of the couple, the person I call the lever or the stayer. And the lever, I don't get to work with them. And the reason I don't get to work with the lever is because they're busy leaving. They're leaving the marriage. And so the person who's left behind, I call the stayer, they are very motivated. They are very willing to learn from the pain they're in. And that's who I'm working with. I'm working with those people. And boy, they're really motivated when you
Yeah.
find them.
Yeah.
Because they identify themselves.
Yeah, for sure. So what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream to grow up and become?
So I could draw. And so I thought, oh, I think I'll do this. If I could draw, I'll do more of this. So then it evolves, drawing evolves into all kinds of expressions. And then you start to get to your adult life and then you start realizing, what is this? And it turns out to be advertising and graphic design. And that becomes the world I'm in, right? And it's all because of art. That's what actually did it. So I just thought I'm gonna draw pictures and that's how I'll make an adult life out of that, right? But I didn't know anything as a third grader. I didn't know. You don't know anything as a third grader,
Yeah. Yeah.
except some profound things that might come to your head.
Yeah, for sure. So how did you get to this point? Talk to me a little bit about your childhood and how these seeds of helping people in their marriage, how did this become who you are?
Well, the reason I am here doing what I'm doing is because I learned about chaos kids by being one. So, what makes a chaos kid? The parents who raise you, the mother and father, or mother only or father only, whoever ends up being the one raising you, they give you all of their own subconscious content. And if that's chaos, that means abandonment, abuse, and neglect. So let's go back a generation. And so we've got, every 20 years we get a new generation. So what's ever happening in those 20 years when you're growing up in the first 10, that actually creates what you become as a teenager. So if you get a lot of trouble in your 1 to 10 years, abandonment, abuse, and neglect, then you're going to be rebellious as a teenager, or you're going to subdue yourself in kind of depression, or whatever bad thing is going to happen is going to show up in the teen years. But because the teen years are so young and so vital, you can kind of get away with a lot as you're struggling with drugs, alcohol, there's all kinds of things that teenagers get involved in. And then you go into your 20s and you're at the peak of your life. Like just think of the Beatles. They were in their 20s at the peak of their life when they wrote all those songs, right? So you get to there, and then you think you're indestructible and you'll never die, and then you enter your 30s. And you enter your 30s, and that's when the childhood experiences of the first 10 years shows up. It shows up there. Because the reason it shows up there is because the subconscious carries a lot of messages. And if you had a lot of abandonment, a lot of abuse, and like let's just talk not physical, let's just talk emotional, because that's what most people are struggling with. They're struggling with emotional abuse, emotional abandonment, and emotional neglect. And when they have those things, they now have a set of instructions. And so when they're in their 30s and 40s, those instructions are all coming alive. Here's how you do something. So my father was a gambler and a teacher. So he taught by day, he gambled by night. Right? And my mother was a homemaker, and she stayed home, and at night she went out to drink. So I had an alcoholic and a gambler raising me, right? So what happens is you have an alcoholic and a gambler. What's happening? You have neglect. You're neglected. And so that was my form of abuse, because they weren't abusive people. They weren't abandoning people other than the emotional abandonment that they had to dish out as gamblers and alcoholics. So when I had that, it took me a long, long time to realize that my very, very nice parents were, these gamblers and alcoholics, but I didn't want to see it. So I ended up marrying a woman named Marcia, and she's the one who got me to see it. She's the one who made me, realize, grab me and realize it, So when I grow up and I end up marrying Marcia, I'm married to her for 40 years. So what happens for 40 years? Well, she's giving me hard reality. Why is she giving me hard reality? Because she's raised by parents who could be violent. And these violent, angry people made her violent and angry. And so that was her style. Her style was violent and angry. And my parents were not like that at all. So I was a really soft-hearted person, and she was really hard-natured. And so I learned about all that from her. And being with her for that 40 years just literally made me take out yellow pads of paper and write all about what's happening to me. And because what I'm doing is I'm studying and I'm writing. I'm studying ideas and I'm writing down what I'm thinking. And what's that? So the ideas coming in from seminars and books and Bibles and all kinds of spiritual texts and all kinds of things like that. And it's coming into me, and I have Marcia churning and burning her lifestyle. And doing things like, your parents were alcoholics and she was accusing me about their lives. And so it's very, very hard to hear. Couldn't hear it. Didn't want to think about it. I thought of them as perfect, ideal. And then I looked at the 3 children they made, and 2 of them were very troubled. And so what was I? I was also very troubled too. But I had a disciplinarian in my life named Marcia, and she's the one who actually took me and shook me to make me actually pay attention and learn. Because when you look at an idea in a book, what does the idea really mean to you? You don't know. You got to write it out. You got to think about it. You got to spend days doing that. And I was doing that for days and weeks and months and years at a time. So that's where I ended up in adult life. But without Marcia, I wouldn't have learned. I couldn't have learned. If I kept going from one marriage to another, and thank goodness that my parents gave me the message, stay married and miserable. Because that message in my subconscious made me stay put. It made me say, well, can't leave, can't go somewhere else, can't find some other woman. No, got to stay married and miserable. And so I stayed. And fortunately, Marcia had the same thing from her parents, stay married and miserable. Mm-hmm. So with that instruction there, that's why we didn't leave. We didn't leave the scene of the crime. We couldn't leave. And so we stayed. And what I had to do is I had to become the learner, because she was not a learner. And so she learned in her own way. You couldn't tell her anything. You couldn't give her a book. You couldn't give her an idea, nothing. She's just a complete non-learner. She had to learn in her own way. And so because that was our makeup for 40 years, that was just transforming my life. And actually what I ended up doing was creating a course, which is really out of all my notes. That I had stacks and stacks of notes that I kept refining and defining into presentable ideas. And so that's what I ended up doing, creating a course called The Environment Changer. And the reason it's called Environment Changer is because you're changing the environment of your mind, which is what I did. And so I say, I lived 27 years in a marriage made in hell. But in the 27th year, I fell in love with my wife. So why do I say I fell in love with my wife? Because I fell in love with myself. And when I started to love myself, which I couldn't do before, I now had the ability to see her differently. And that's what was key. I saw her differently. Because how do you see a person differently? You don't see her in the old way. In the old way, you see you're a trouble and problem. I'm not a trouble and problem. That's the way you see them. Because you're separate from me, you're in trouble, and I'm not trouble. And so when you see yourself that way, you aren't going to grow anywhere. All right. But when you start to see them differently, that's the beginning of a chance to change what you're in.
So who's been kind of a role model or a hero for you in your life?
Um, I think that role models to me are people who are successful in changing lives. And so magazines are the place where I see role models. I see people that are written about. And, you can go into a big national magazine and they'll write about Steve Jobs level people. But then when you go down into local magazines and regional magazines, they'll write about people you never heard of. People who started businesses, people who are changing lives of people who work for them. Or you'll see Undercover Boss. Undercover Boss is a television show, and every once in a while there'll be a person who's just as very committed to making people's lives better. So they'll do that kind of thing. So I put all those people together, and they start to create a role model group to me.
Yeah.
Like if they can do it, I can do it.
Yeah.
So that's how they start to think. So my wife died in 2019, and when she died, I started to go into a wondering period of like, what am I supposed to do? And so I had a therapist who was teaching me guided imagery, and she said, "You're too young. You need to find somebody." And so I never thought that. So after she died, I didn't think anything like, where am I going? What am I doing? I was just kind of getting oriented and trying to figure out, I got to leave the house where she died. That's the first thing I knew I had to do. And that's as far as my goal went. And so when she said, you're too young, you got to find somebody. And then she said, well, you need to write out the qualities of her and her family and tell about what you're really looking for. And so I like took the assignment obediently. I said, okay. And so I wrote it out in my journal. I wrote out the description. Like it took me like a day to write it. And after I had like 2 pages or so of description, I thought, well, that feels good. Now what happens? I think, does she show up next week? Does she show up next month? she doesn't show up next week or next month. And the reason she doesn't is I look back, is I was telling the story I wanted, which was what I wrote. And then I had the story I doubted. Like, does it really work like this? Come on, this is a human being now. There's situations and yeah, I don't know. And because. And so I was telling doubt and I was telling want. And I told the story like back and forth for years. Like it lasted from 2000 when the pandemic hit, which is where I wrote the story about what I was looking for. And then I went 4 years to 2023. So 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. And then I went on a hike and I met her. And so there she was. And I just fell in love with her. And it was a stunning thing. Uh, but that happened. Why did that take so much time? I believe it took so much time because I was telling two stories, the story I wanted and the story I doubted. And when you're going through life, you're changing through time. You change, like your mood changes, your feelings change, everything's changing in the day that you're in. You're always changing. And so when you're changing, your emotional condition is changing. And so you might not even remember to tell the story. You might not remember to even believe the story that you're telling. And so you end up looking at ideas that are not worth it. They're not good. They're ego ideas and they're trouble. So I would wander into that. I didn't stay very long, but I just enough to just kind of keep me on the edges of what I'm looking for. This is what I want. So now we are in love, and that is of course all the things everybody wants. They all want that. So you fell in love at this age? Yeah, I did. Why? Because I wrote about it.
Yeah.
What
So
do they call it? manifesting.
Manifest destiny, absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
So what is the motivation for you every day? You're helping all kinds of people as a coach. What is that motivator for you to get up out of bed and not only to do that for them, but to also evolve as a human yourself?
So what's happening is the more I teach, the more I learn.
Mhm.
And you know this, Joe, you know this. The more I teach, the more I learn. And so if I don't teach, I really don't learn very well. And if I do teach, man, I learn a lot. And so I'm explaining things to people. I remember the whole idea of telling stories, and uh, and I didn't really see it so clearly as till I started to teach it. And I started to teach it. The more I talked about it, the more I started to see it clearly. And so it started to grow, the idea of telling stories. And then I started to realize that everything exists because a story is told. Everything. It nothing can actually be in the physical world if somebody doesn't tell a story. Well, what is that? That's a picture of spirit, which is the story.
Yeah.
Spirit turns into things, right? In this place. And so this whole place is ours. This whole place is our making. But if we're living lives where we're split, and I asked this question to people as I started to develop this. I said, so let's take 2 weeks of your life and let's ask the question, what percent in the last 2 weeks did you tell stories you want? And what percent did you tell stories you doubt? And so I explain what that is. And then they kind of think and feel it and say, oh, like 80-20. I said, okay, so you've got a 20% doubt story and 80% want story. And you feel really good about the 80%, and you're kind of ignoring the 20%. You don't even know it's a problem. But that 20% is causing a drag to slow down the story you want. And so when they start to think about that, which is a brand new idea, and that's one of the things that actually motivates me to see people getting a brand new idea for the first time.
Yeah.
And it came from me, and it came to them, and then he started to struggle with it. And that's just what I did. I got a new idea, I started to struggle with it, and all of a sudden I started to accept it. Well, they're starting to do the same thing. So that's why I stay in this course. I've been teaching this course for 15 years, and it's just everybody is so different because they're all combinations of all childhoods, all kinds of childhoods. And so the variety is just magnificent. And the ideas just never stop. So this never gets old,
Yeah.
ever gets old.
So let me
So
ask you this. Of all of the things that you've done and become and evolved into, what are you the proudest of that you've done?
um, what I want to say is the standard answer is I'm proud of my kids. But I want to say that. And the reason I don't want to say that is because that's what everybody's proud of.
Yeah.
They're proud of your kids, right? But when you say I'm proud of my kids, I'm proud of the way they turned out is more what I'm proudest of, the
Mhm.
way they turned out. And when I look at my chaos background, I didn't give them the best instructions. Personally, I didn't give them the best instructions, but they turned out pretty down solid anyway. So I can't take all the credit for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But how they turned out is really the great story.
Yeah, for sure. So as a person, everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your clients, but you ultimately are in control. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Um, I like to think of myself as a inventor because an inventor is a creator. And when I'm a creator, I'm feeling like, well, if I'm a creator all the time, then all the options are open. So that's how I see myself. I see myself as a creator. And so I started to teach that. You can either be a reactor or a creator, or a reactor and a creator. So what were you in your marriage? I was a reactor married to a reactor. And what happened? Well, very bad things because we were reacting to each other. But what if you became a creator and you were married to a reactor? That reactor has to react to your creation. And you never thought of that. You never thought of the idea of I become the creator and my reactor reacts to me. Oh, I don't even know that what would happen. So really optimistic people start to really feel good about that. And the reason I'm talking about that is because that's how I see myself. So I see myself as a creator because I have lots more options to do and be and have and move around the planet in the way with that I really like to, according to the story I'm telling. So one of the stories I tell that I like to talk to people about is I'm vital and alive till I die in my sleep. And I tell that story a lot, thousands of times.
Yeah.
Because when doubt comes, it comes to take away what you want. And so if doubt comes to say, take away what you want, you have to say, cancel that. And when you say cancel that, it shuts it off temporarily.
Yeah.
But the second, more strong way to get rid of your ego to shut it up is to say, well, you can bother me all you want, but I'm going to tell this story 1,000 times. And so the 1,000-time story is real strong because that means I'm going to be telling the story 1,000 times. And so if you want to bother me and trouble me with worry and doubt and anxiety and all that, it doesn't matter because I'm going to be telling this 1,000 times. So you're going to have to get in line.
Yeah.
So that's really, that's an idea of a creator. That
Yeah.
creator thinks that way.
So if anyone out there is riding the line of thinking they need help in their marriage and they're inclined to come your direction, how would you convince them that it should happen? And what's the first step?
So my phrase is, it only takes one to heal a marriage. Now, why does it only take one? How could that be when the world says 50-50 and take two to tango? Because that's the world's message all the time. So why does it take one to heal a marriage? It takes one to become a creator. One person has to become a creator. When one person becomes a creator, we're left with one reactor. So I have my analogy I tell about the cruise ship. So you're a cruise ship and you have a great cruise ship that's making people happy. And the problem is you have a rat in the bottom of your ship you don't know is there. And then your spouse, the person you marry, they have a great cruise ship, but they have a rat in the bottom of your ship they don't know is there. And so you start to sense something's wrong. So you go to a seminar and you find out you might have a rat. So you go through all the time and trouble to get rid of the rat. And now there's two ships, but there's only one rat. And so one rat is still pushing with a thing called against energy. And that rat is pushing all the time, trying to get things to be destroyed between the ships because the ships don't know why they're separating. But now your ship has no rat to push back. And because your rat has no rat to push back, that's really the essence of what I'm teaching in It Only Takes One to Heal a Marriage. Why does it only take one? Because your ship has no rat.
Yeah.
That's the reason. And so that's what I'm focused on. It only takes one to heal a marriage. And so that's really the message I want to give people.
So if anyone out there wants to reach out, they want to hire you, learn more about you, anything about your world, where do they go?
They go to larrybilotta.com.
Okay. Okay. Excellent.
So if they get the spelling right, they'll get there. Bilotta.
So we will put the right spelling in there. Larry, this has been awesome. Thank you, sir, for your story. Thank you for your time. Keep doing the good work. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Thanks for what you're doing. All right.
Yes, sir.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.